Hello and welcome to the web series ZeroPM Pieces. In the ZeroPM Pieces, the researchers in the project will tell you about one piece of the ZeroPM puzzle that they're working on. So without further ado, here comes a ZeroPM piece.
Hi everyone, my name is Rahul. I am doing my doctorate at Chalmers University of Technology and I am involved with ZeroPM. So today I'm going to present what I am doing in my research. So I'm working on the characterization factor of PM chemicals. So first I will start with the background. So I'm working with the LCA. So in life, we are using a lot of products. We are using textile, we are using electronics, shoe, and all products. But for the production of all the products, we need a production facility that will produce. But for that production, we also need raw material. We need wood, we need steel, and we need water and other materials along with chemicals. Most of the chemicals nowadays are synthetic chemicals, and each and every day we are producing more and more chemicals. And after using our product, there is an end of life. So we have the product which we all are dependent. We are using our product. They need a production. For the production, we need the raw materials. And after using our product, there is an end of life. But what will happen? Because during the entire phases, we are also emitting a lot of emission. For example, carbon dioxide, methane. But when we are using chemical, we are also emitting chemical in different compartment, in air, in water, in marine compartment, in soil, in sediment. But what will happen with all the emission? Where it will go? So all the emission will go in the environment and the environment will react. It will react in some form of impact. For some emission, it will react in form of climate change. It will increase the climate change and we have greenhouse gases and the temperature of the earth will increase. But for other emission like chemical, it will react in a form of toxicity. So if we go for safe and sustainable by design, European Union, then they have different impact category. So all the product we are using, they have the emission and all the emission will lead to different types of impact. And in my research, I am focusing on toxicity, and within toxicity, the focus is on ecotoxicity. If we are emitting some chemical, what is the impact on ecotoxicity on the environment? So how we understand the impact in a common language. For example, if you are going to buy a grocery, and you have a list of all the products you need for a week. You need 1 kg of apple because you want to be healthy. You want to drink something. You need 1 liter of milk. You want to give flower to your loved one. You need flour, and you are very rich. You need gold. So you are buying 1 kg of apple, 1 liter of milk, some flowers, and 1 gram of gold. So how you calculate your total cost? So you have to calculate number of products you are buying. What is the product unit? How much you are buying and what is the cost per unit of the product. And when you combine all of them, you have the total cost. And each and every product have different costs. 1 gram of gold may be much costly as compared to Apple. And then you have to convert everything in a common unit, maybe in dollar or euro to pay to the shopkeeper. And then come to the impact category, climate change, that we are very familiar. So we have different type of greenhouse gases. We have to find what greenhouse gases we are emitting, whether it is carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. We need to know how much we are emitting, whether it is 1 gram, 1 kg, 1 ton, and what is the impact of different gases in the total climate change. For example, methane is around 29.8 times more as compared to carbon dioxide. So it has more impact. And then we have to calculate all the gases we are releasing, quantity of gases, and their conversion into the common unit. But think about what I am working on. I am working on ecotoxicity. So where the emission will come, it come from different chemicals. So I need to know what are the chemicals we are emitting, whether we are emitting in fresh water, marine water, soil, sediment, and how much we are emitting. And what is the conversion factor to convert different types of chemical into the common unit of ecotoxicity. But think about chemical. When we are talking about the greenhouse gases and the climate change, we have around 300 different types of factors, 300 different types of gases based on what gas and which compartment. But for chemicals, we have so many chemicals. For example, in ACA, we have around 145,000 pre-registers chemicals. In different international and national database, we have 350,000 chemicals. And some of the chemicals are confidential chemicals. For example, in cars, we have 219 million chemicals. So we have millions of chemicals. Think about not all the chemical, think about one category of chemical like PFAS, commonly known as forever chemical. We have 7 million chemicals and growing, and we are producing more and more chemical each and every day. But think about, okay, we have millions of chemical, but how many characterization factors we have for ecotoxicity? Millions? Hundred of thousand? No, we have approximately 250 100. So it is only 2.5 thousand chemicals for which we have characterization factors. So we have millions of chemicals that can contribute to ecotoxicity, but in terms of characterization factors, we don't have so many factors. So how we can find the impact of all the chemicals when they are emitted to the environment? So we have to calculate new characterization factor, and how one can calculate, for which we have one tool like USTOX, we have other tools, but this is the scientific consensus model. So most of the people are using this tool to calculate the characterization factor for different chemicals. And to calculate, you need three factors. You need fate factor, exposure, and effect factor. And effect factor is mainly the toxicity factor. So for each and every chemical, you need a lot of physical chemical property and toxicity values to calculate the factors. And then you have the characterization factor for different chemicals. So what I am doing in my research, so I am working with 0PM, and we are mainly working with the PM chemical, persistent and mobile chemical, because they can stay in the environment and they can move. So we selected 64 chemicals that are prioritized in the European Union. But what happens if you are using a chemical? The chemical you are using, then it will be released in the environment, but it can also transform. For example, it can transform to something that is more toxic and more persistent. So you also have to include the transformation product of these chemicals. But we don't have a proper way how to include it. So we, in our research, we find a simplified way. We calculated all the transformation product for the chemical which are in our database, and we find whether they are more persistent and more toxic than the primary chemical, and we included three chemicals. But here there is a catch, because most of the chemical are theoretical chemical. We don't have a lot of experimental data, and we don't have other way to find their toxicity. So there is a lot of data gap in terms of transformation products. But out of 64 chemical, how many chemical do we have in our database, like Hustock database? We have very small, only 18 chemicals that overlap. So for the remaining chemical, we have to calculate new characterization factor. And how we can calculate? We have to calculate the physical chemical properties, and we also have to collect the toxicity data. But in toxicity data, we can have experimental data, but experimental data is very toxic. And for most of the chemical, there is no data available. Or maybe it is available, but it is confidential, so we don't have the access to that data. So we have to use a lot of QSAR model to estimate some toxicity values. And then we calculate the characterization factor. But once you have a data, what will happen? Then you also have to think about whether the data in the format you need. Maybe it is in different format. It was collected for different purpose. Maybe it is not in fresh water. It may be in marine water, sediment, or maybe it is a duplicate. Maybe it is not chronic. So you have to collect all the data, and then you have to harmonize all the data. So it will be in a format in which you can calculate the characterization factors, so they will be reliable. You cannot use the data as it is. You have to convert the data in the format that is required, and for that you have to follow a lot of process. You have to harmonize the data based on whether it is the real data, whether it is experimental, whether it is like a duplicate, and everything. So in our research, we have like a different step to harmonize the data for different type of the species they belong, the type of unit they have. And after that, we calculate the characterization factor. And this is a part of our result. You think in our 64 chemicals, we have like different PFAS, triazines, and triazoles. They are different group of chemical. Then we thought like maybe they are very narrow. They may have a small, okay, if you have a PFAS, they belong to the same group. If you have like triazine, they belong to a different group. And then we can compare the characterization factor based on the chemical group they belong. But there is a lot of diversity. For example, PFAS may have characterization factor from lower to higher. They are very diverse. So we cannot say, okay, we have a group, it maybe have a lower or higher relative to other chemical group. So this is a part of result. We cannot say characterization factor based on the grouping of the chemical. based on grouping, it may be lower and higher based on the values. The other thing, we don't have a lot of experimental data. We have experimental data only for 47 chemicals, and for others, we have to collect estimated data. But even with the QSAR and other things, you cannot collect all the estimated data. Most of the QSAR may not run for some chemical. So you have to find a way how to collect the data for the remaining to fill the data gaps. In our research, we take an average of the group and assign to the unknown PFAS and triazole. But this may not be a right way because there is a lot of diversity, and this is one of the limitations of the research. We have to find how we can estimate and fill the data gap for the chemical for which we don't have neither the experimental data nor the estimated data. The other part, okay, we have a lot of overlap. We have like 18 chemical that overlapping for which we already have the characterization factor. So in simple, they must be same. But in our research, it is not so because the characterization factor in the USOC database was collected based on previous data. But for chemical, we are collecting new data every time there are new species. So we have more data available that may be different from the previous data. So in a way, all the factors are not static, they are dynamic. They change over time. As for example, for 17 chemical, we collected estimated data, but in future we may have experimental data, then we have to update our factors. And even if it's experimental, we may cover more species and more diversity, more environment, then we have to update. So this is one point. The factors are not static, they are dynamic, and over the period of time, we have to update them based on reliability. It is similar with the methane because initially when we start the impact of methane on climate change, in comparison to carbon dioxide, initially factor was 20, then it was 25, then 28, now it is 29.8. So over the period of time with more research, we have to update the characterization factor. So we have to maintain the accuracy. The other thing, what happened with the QSAR? So we have the QSAR. If we don't have the experimental data, we can use QSAR to collect the data. But the reliability of QSAR are not that much. For example, we compare the values from the experimental based data and the QSAR data, and the correlation factor was very low. It is because in the QSAR were formulated for different purpose. It was not for characterization factor. They may have different species, they may have different endpoint. They are mainly acute, not chronic. So they are limited based on the species and the exposure, and we need different types of QSAR for the characterization factor calculation. Maybe nowadays there is a new attempt to use AI to calculate new model for QSAR that can be used for characterization factors. So the main result from our study, first one is like characterization factor we need to update over time. They are not static, they are dynamic. And if we have more better data, we have to update them. Second, QSAR, we have QSAR to collect the data, but they are not reliable. We need better QSAR that can be used for characterization factor that will give the toxicity value that we are needed, like chronic values and different species. And the other point, we cannot say if a chemical belong to a group, it has similar characterization factor. Characterization factor may vary, like maybe within the group, and within a small group it may also vary. So it is very hard to correlate based on grouping whether it is same or not. And the other thing, the major point, we have millions of chemicals, we have thousands of characterization factor, and we have to do more research, maybe with the help of AI and other things, to how we can fill the data gap and what is a better way to fill that data gap. And the last one is like what will happen with the transformation product, how we can include the transformation product in the characterization factors for which we are doing research. And in future, I will do some case study to know how to apply the characterization factor, what is the impact they will get. Thank you very much for listening to me. Now I am open to questions and hope I will come again to give some new results in future. Thank you.
ZeroPM, Zero Pollution of Persistent and Mobile Substances. This project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under grant agreement number 101036756.